Roundhouse: The Multiple Roots of Evil. In the spring of 1988, Joe Coots finds his once picturesque family life shattered upon encountering his mother raped and doused with gasoline after returning home from work one evening to obtain a file for a client named Mayla. The novel, told through the perspective of Antone Basil Joe Coots, looking back upon his past, exemplifies the anguish of a 13-year-old boy torn and lost in the midst of justice for his mother and forced to grow in order to accommodate to the events that surround him. Joe, throughout the novel, is forced to idly watch by as his father attempts to prosecute the perpetrator of his mother's crime, but is instead set free after arrest due to a failing justice system. It is due to such failure that Joe decides to take matters into his own accord, learning how to shoot through the aid of his best friend Cappy, in order to bring upon justice to the man who raped his mother and in order to restore a sense of normalcy within his family. After multiple days of training, Joe shoots Lyndon, the perpetrator, one dreary summer morning with the help of his friend Cappy. Together, the two boys suffer in torment as they learn to live with the consequences of the actions they've done. The novel concludes with the death of Cappy due to a car crash and Joe being driven home by his parents as an older, wiser, and matured adult. So one of my devices that I chose was a biblical allusion, and that was when he was driving home from his mom after going to the shop to get the bullets, and he decided that it is not sins crying out to heaven for vengeance, but rather it was sins crying out to heaven for justice. And I said within the novel, Erdrich purposely chose to allude to the Bible numerous times in order to justify the actions that Joe commits throughout the novel. Through this reference, the reader is able to connect Joe's anguish concerning his mother's rape and humanize the action, killing Lyndon, that he commits later on within the novel. It is through this allusion that the reader can see the meticulous thought Joe's character has put forth in his decision to kill Lyndon's character. He did not see it merely as revenge or retribution towards what was done to his mother, but rather the morally wrongful act of killing another man is seen as justice. It is because of the shortcomings of God and justice system that Joe must seek for justice in his own accord, and by twisting the sins crying out of heaven for vengeance into crying out to heaven for justice, he's able to justify to himself why the morally wrongful act of killing another man must be done in order to protect his mother and seek justice for what was done to her. And my other device was symbolism, and it was at the end of the story where he passes by the cafe that they used to always go on during the childhood trips. And I said in the quote, the roadside cafe Joe speaks of symbolizes his childhood and innocence that he must leave behind him. The cafe, characterized in a sense of familiarity and warmth, represents a time period prior to the rape of his mother, a time period in which Joe repeatedly sought to seek throughout the novel after his mother's rape destroyed the family dynamic that once characterized their home. At the final scene of the novel, Joe discovers that despite killing Lyndon in order to restore and protect the family dynamic that he sought to conserve, he is unable to return to the warmth and familiarity of the cafe. It is through this symbol that Erdrich is able to exhibit the growth and maturity that occurred within Joe's character, and how despite killing Lyndon, his morality has left him as a person unable to return to the place he sought to seek repeatedly throughout the novel. My third device is an anecdote, and I specifically pointed out this story about the old buffalo and Nanapush. And I said the multiple stories about Nanapush, his mother, and the old buffalo throughout the novel serves the purpose of guiding Joe throughout the story. It is through the anecdote presented that Joe is able to find the courage to persevere to find justice for his mother when all is against him, his father, the justice system, and most of all, Lyndon. Due to the wisdom imparted by Mushum to Joe, told through the story of Nanapush, Joe was able to break himself apart from the monotony of society and find the courage to do the extreme. Kill Lyndon, as evident with the quote, to think for himself, even to the most ridiculous thing that occurred to him. Furthermore, the story of Nanapush and Buffalo further asserts the dominance Caucasians hold upon Native Americans in the past by pushing them towards reservations and killing their main source of food, and also in the present through the immunity that Lyndon holds from being convicted of his crime. My fourth device is a metaphor, and it is further towards the end of the novel where he's looking back upon the roots and how it's strange that like a root can be so powerful even if it's planted in the wrong place. And I said, in the Roundhouse, the subject of roots are repeatedly compared to the subject of Geraldine's rape, This is fitting due to the fact that it is a reflection of the entangled web of character motivation prevalent throughout the story that led to Geraldine's rape. In the novel, Linden's crime was not solely motivated by his deep devotion to Mela or his hatred for Native Americans, but rather it was a culmination of numerous factors. It was due to the treatment he received from his mother. It was a society ousting him because of Linda. And I go to say that this extended metaphor is significant due to the fact that it exhibits how multiple roots of evil led to Geraldine's crime, and how it was not one sole reason that the Coutts family dynamic was destroyed, but rather it was a culmination of other factors, such as a lack of legal justice. It just further demonstrates the power held in one's action and how it has the power to affect others beyond them. So I did the text-to-text connection to Kite Runner, and I chose to do it because Amir and Joe were both children that faced such a traumatic event at a young age, but in the Kite Runner, Amir decided to run in the face of adversity, while Joe decided to face the adversity and take matters into his own accord. But despite the characters taking such different approach, they were still able to grow from their mistake and gain wisdom from their choices. And I also wanted to bring to the table norms of society and how it strongly affected the motivation and behaviors of the characters. Another thing that I talked about is text to world and how it talked about the maltreatment that often occurs towards women, and it's shown towards Sanja, and how like we often demean women into an object to be fawned upon and to be respected, and through Geraldine, and how we see women as an object of domestication, and we expect them to simply cater to our own personal needs rather than seeing them as people who were hurt or who have feelings. And then this is the setting, and I said the novel occurs on a reservation in North Dakota, and it is told through the story of Nanapush and the Buffalo that reservation land used to be fairly extensive, but as time has gone by, land from Native Americans have gradually depleted as natives are asked to further retreat within the reservation. And I said the setting of the novel greatly affects the plot, and that Geraldine's rape may have occurred on federal land, state land, or tribal fee land. It is because of the ambiguous nature of where Geraldine's crime happened that Linden was able to remain free due to the fact that tribal court has no jurisdiction upon whites, and the fact that the rape may have occurred outside of tribal land. And my favorite quotes was, this was one of the quotes that I analyzed earlier on about like roots back to the end of the novel. And I said I chose it due to the fact that it shows a power, like it has, like what we do and what we say, it has the power to deeply embed itself to a person and change the course of one's life. Although it may sound cliche, it goes to show how we must be cautious in how we act and how we treat those around us, because one action has such a long-lasting impact upon our lives. This other quote right here is about Randall when they did the first, when he, at the beginning of the novel, when he asked Cappy and Joe to volunteer for this big event that he was holding, and how he had that prediction about like Joe just lying there on the floor and there was a cop over him, and he asked him, we should put down the tobacco and pray over it. And I chose this quote because at first I didn't understand what putting down the tobacco meant, but when I looked it up, it was an act of praying one's worry to a tobacco and smoking it afterwards in order for the prayers to reach the gods. I was not aware of this ritual and how tobacco in native culture is associated to have properties that absorb toxins. It starkly contrasted with my perspective of what tobacco is and how it's associated as poisonous within American society. One of my other favorite quotes has to be the one about the cemetery, in how he didn't want to go inside, not because he didn't want to see his loving ancestor, but the gut kick of history that he feels when he goes in there. And I chose this quote due to the fact that it shows a deeply rooted anguish within Native American culture and the years of oppression, inequality, and injustice that have occurred within their culture. Rather than their past being viewed under a lens of vibrancy and culture, like most, Ojibwe children often characterize the past as being oppressed by the oppressors that still seek to subdue the rights today. And my last favorite quote is, this was when Father Travis was talking about how he saw JFK get killed right in front of him, and he was talking about how he would sometimes just stare at nights and think about like what may have happened and what didn't happen that have led to him being alive right now. And I said this is one of my favorite quotes from the novel due to the fact that it shows the complexity of life and the endless possibilities of what could be in place of what it is. It portrays them as the entangled nature of life and how we must be appreciative of the present, for it could be worse than we can imagine. One of my literary criticisms is this one's from Sandra, giving the stripping scene to Musham. And from the feminist perspective, I said that Sandra is demeaning to an object for Musham and Joe to fawn upon. Yet, despite being sexualized into an object, Sandra's character holds power over the two men as she is able to manipulate and blind them with her body. It is at this moment following the strip scene that Sandra is able to assert her dominance upon a male figure within a novel. Granted, it is a 13-year-old boy, and criticize Joe for his actions towards women. It is because of Sandra's action that Joe is able to realize the flaws towards his treatment of women and change himself. In the archetypal perspective, I said that in the scene, Sandra is depicted as a seductress towards the innocent Joe, the hero of the novel, and this scene is different from one may originally interpret it through the archetypal perspective due to the fact that Sandra did not utilize her body in order to tempt Joe, but rather she used her sexuality as a means of teaching him a lesson. It is because of the scene that Joe strays from simply sexualizing women further on in the novel and learns of how demeaning his previous perspective was. So it's like a big life lesson for our hero. This other scene that I chose to analyze was when Geraldine tells Joe and Basil about what happened like during the night of her rape when they were eating dinner. And through the Marxist perspective, I said in the passage, Lyndon, a white male, is able to assert his dominance over Geraldine and Mila, two Native American women. In this scene, Lyndon brings up the topic of how the strong, presumably white people, should rule the weak, which are presumably Native Americans in the context. It is due to this class conflict that Lyndon seeks to assert power over Native American women, even if it resulted in him raping two women. The rape further suppresses Native Americans as mere pawns to be controlled by whites, and the lack of justice for the case further asserts Lyndon's belief on white supremacy. And then through the feminist perspective, I said in the passage, women are demeaned as mere pawns to be controlled by men. Through the rape, Erdrich is able to relay the lack of power men hold as women hold, as they must lay submissive for Lyndon to do as he pleases with them. Although at the end of the passage, Geraldine does get away and women are able to trap men in the end, but regardless, there is still a disparity between the power dynamic existent between men and women, as Lyndon is able to almost get away with his crime. And one of my unique discoveries was I did not know Erdrich was Native American. I was honestly surprised when I looked that up, and I found that most of her work is heavily built towards the heritage of both her parents. And then I found out that she was one of the first women to attend Dartmouth College, and that's pretty impressive. Granted that Dartmouth is now like an Ivy League school. And then prior to the Roundhouse, she also wrote a book about the Plague of Doves, and it featured Musham and Clemens and Basil. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. And my final analysis was it wasn't really the best book. I would give it 3 out of 5 stars. And it's my least favorite book that I've read this year. Erdrich touched numerous topics within a novel, but regardless, the novel seemed to lack focus as there seemed to be like a plethora of unneeded details that were thrown sporadically throughout the book. Furthermore, I feel as if she failed to develop the characters within the novel, as at the end, Joe may display a sense of growth and maturation. It still seemed as if he remained somewhat the same throughout the novel. You know, he still seemed to be like that whiny little kid at the beginning of the novel. And I said, in conclusion, it may have not been the best novel by far, but Erdrich does do a spectacular job at characterizing the pain and anguish and other numerous emotions the characters felt throughout the novel. And that's my presentation. If there's anything that you didn't get to read, then please go pause and like read over it. I'm sorry I messed up talking, but hopefully I did a good job.